We're in our series through the book of Mark, and last time we covered Mark chapter 4, all except the last 6 verses. And the reason I stopped there is because the main portion of chapter 4 was all about the parables of Jesus. And then these last 6 verses really go better with chapter 5. So Mark chapter 4 verses 35 all the way through all of chapter 5 have to deal with more miracles of Jesus. And remember, the chapter breaks in the Bible really aren't part of the original text. Those chapter breaks and verse numbering was added many, many years later. And in my humble opinion, I think chapter 5 should have started 6 verses earlier. So that's how I'm treating it today. So even though it says chapter 5 is what we're covering today, we're actually going to back up a little bit and start with Mark chapter 4, verse 35. And then we'll roll on in and cover all of chapter 5 as well. So Mark chapter 5 and a little bit of chapter 4. So let's start with Mark 4 verses 35 through 41. On that day when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" So let me set the scene here. If you weren't here last week, or if you've slept since last week and can't remember what we talked about, last time we saw that Jesus spent the whole day teaching to the crowds. And there were so many people gathering around him there at the shore of the Sea of Galilee that he actually had to get in a boat and push off a little bit away from the shore to get away from the people so that he could continue his teaching. And he He taught right up until sunset, pretty much. You know, it was starting to get dark, and so he said, "Take me across the sea." So that's the situation here. He had a long, hard day of dealing with the crowds and teaching the crowds. So as they got in the boats and started going across the sea, naturally he fell asleep because he was tired. Well, as is prone to happen on the Sea of Galilee, a storm suddenly kind of blew up out of nowhere. And these fishermen, the disciple fishermen, were familiar with that sea, and they also knew how bad those storms could get, especially in their little fishing boats. And their boat was already taken on water. And so they kind of panicked. They were fearful. They thought they were going to die. So they woke up Jesus, and you can tell the fear in their voice when they wake him up and say, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And maybe getting a little dramatic there, a little drama, but why do you think they went to Jesus? Do you think that they knew that he was going to wake up and calm the storm? Based on their reaction, I would say, no, I don't think so. Because first they came afraid of the storm, and then after Jesus calmed the storm, they were afraid of him and his power. So I don't think they knew exactly what he was going to do, but I do think they knew he could do something more than they could. I mean, they knew that he had this supernatural power, and they had seen him perform all these miracles, and so they thought they were going to die, and so they woke him up. He rebuked the wind, and then in a way he kind of turns and rebukes them. And he says, they asked him, don't you care that we're perishing? And I think it's interesting, John was one of the apostles that were there. And later, John would pen probably the most famous verse, the first verse we all memorize, John 3:16, in which it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. So John learned a lesson here. Jesus kind of rebukes them and says, how can you ask that question? It kind of reminds me of a scene from the movie Fiddler on the Roof, when Tevye asks his wife Goldie, "Do you love me?" And she says, "Do I love you? For 25 years I washed your clothes, I cooked your meals, I cleaned your house, given you children, milked your cow." And they go back and forth with the "do you love me?" And then she finishes up with, "For 25 years I've lived with him, fought with him, starved with him. 25 years my bed is his. If that's not love, what is?" So Goldie is in a sense saying, after all that we've been through, how can you even ask if I love you? It should be obvious after 25 years of being together that I love you. And I kind of said, Jesus is kind of saying the same thing. They haven't been together 25 years, but they had seen a lot. They had already been together for quite a while, and Jesus had performed a lot of miracles. And for them to come to him and say, "Don't you care that we're perishing?" It's like Jesus is saying, how can you even ask that after all that we've been through already? I mean, that's the reason I came. So it kind of shows their lack of faith or lack of understanding of just exactly who Jesus is and why he came. He came so that those who believe in him will not perish. He doesn't want us to perish. He didn't want them to perish. I think, again, it's interesting that they went from being fearful of the storm to being fearful of Jesus' power. But to their credit, they did go to him in the middle of their storm. They knew they couldn't do anything. They were helpless. They were in the middle of this physical storm, and they went to Jesus. The lesson for us, of course, is that in our storms of life, in the middle of our storms, we need to go to Jesus. He is the one who will get us through them. He can either calm the storms or carry us through those storms. Jesus is the one to turn to in the middle of our storms. Now getting into chapter 5, verses 1 through 13. Another miracle. Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 13. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. So here's another case of Jesus casting out demons. Early on in the book of Mark, one of his first miracles that Mark recorded was casting out demons. Well, here's another case of Jesus doing that. But this time it wasn't just one or two demons. It was thousands of demons, a legion of demons. Could be anywhere from 1,000 to 6,000. This man had been possessed. We don't know how long, but for long enough that he was isolated from the community, isolated from his family and friends, living among the tombs, among the dead people. And the townspeople were afraid of him, that they weren't able to bind him anymore. He was given supernatural power because of the demons that dwelt in him, that possessed him. He was so powerful he could break those chains and shackles. So he was just kind of isolated. No one could bind him. Then he met Jesus. And it says that he ran to Jesus. And it's hard to know how much control he had. If he himself ran to Jesus, which is what I think, because he knew that Jesus could deliver him, because I can't imagine the demons wanting to be in front of Jesus. So he ran to Jesus, and then the demons start having this argument with Jesus. What do you want to do? What do you have to do with me? But he sought Jesus to be freed from his demons. So the question for us is, what demons are we struggling with? What demons are we fighting with in our life? Jesus can free us from those demons. Whether you struggle with one thing or many things, here Jesus says he can free us. We see that Jesus can free us from whatever we're struggling with. This is a great story of a restored life. Jesus is the giver of life, and he can restore our life as well. This man had basically lost his life. He was not able to be amongst the friends and be a part of his community. He was isolated. And Jesus gave him back his life. You would think that the townspeople who had been afraid of this man and been dealing with him for so long would be happy that Jesus restored this man's life. But that's not what happens. Let's keep reading verses 14 through 20. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. And he was getting into the boat. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with the demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. So the people of this town had been dealing with this demon-possessed man for a long time. And then when they came up and saw that he was back in his right mind, he was dressed and in his right mind, rather than rejoicing, it says they feared. Some people just aren't happy unless they're fearful, I guess. Their fear of the man should have gone away. But it doesn't say who they were afraid of. But I kind of have the impression that they now were afraid of Jesus. Just like the disciples were afraid of Jesus' power, now here's Jesus sitting next to this man that once was crazy and possessed, and now Jesus is sitting next to him, and he's been restored. So that they are fearful of something. And rather than being happy, and everyone else that met Jesus wanted to be with him, instead these people said, "Can you leave, please?" They wanted him to leave their area. Well, one thing to realize is that this is one of the only areas that Jesus visited that had a majority of Gentiles. This is more of a Gentile village or area, region. And that's why there were pigs there, 2,000 pigs. Jews don't eat pork. They don't eat bacon. They don't eat pork, right? So they wouldn't even raise pigs. So this is a Gentile community, and probably a Gentile community herd of pigs. And what they saw was their livelihood floating in the water as part of this cure that Jesus did. And so they valued their pigs. They valued their livelihood more than this man's life. Let that sink in for a little bit. They valued pigs more than this man's life. The question for us is, what do we have in our life that we value more than the life of someone else? Jesus told this man that he couldn't come with them, that he wanted him to go back to his community and share what the Lord had done. That's the same calling that's on our lives. We are called to share with our community what the Lord has done. But what are we putting in place? What do we value more that keeps us from sharing Jesus with others? Because we know Jesus can restore their life. Jesus can change their life. If we put something else ahead of carrying out our Great Commission, then we're being like these people. We're putting that thing before the lives of others. This man went on to really be the first evangelist in that area. Before Paul or Peter showed up in this area, this man was out proclaiming Jesus among the Gentiles. Among his family. It was a mixed area, but mostly Gentiles. Mark finishes up chapter 5 with a story of actually two miracles that are kind of intertwined a little bit. It's set up in verses 21 through the first sentence in verse 24. Mark chapter 5, 21 through first part of 24. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. So this is the setup of the story. So Jesus gets back to the area where all the crowds like him, and one of the leaders of the synagogue come to him. Remember now, the religious leaders were not real fans of Jesus. They were trying to get rid of him. But this one was smart enough to know that Jesus could help him. His daughter was sick, she was about to die, and he knew that Jesus would be able to heal her. So he went to her. Maybe against the wishes of the other religious leaders in the area, he brought his storm to Jesus. So Jesus sets out to go to his house to see his daughter. Well, on the way, something else happens. The rest of verse 24 through verse 34. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and he came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garment, I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in him that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, and be healed of your disease." So as Jesus was heading to Jairus' house to heal his daughter, this unusual event happens. All these people are pressing in against Jesus. They're all there wanting Jesus to do something for them. When this lady comes up behind him, and she has enough faith to know, I don't need Jesus to do anything for me. I just need to touch his garments. And she reaches out and touches him, and she is healed. The scene kind of gets humorous here when Jesus stops and turns around and says, "Who touched me?" And his disciples are like, hello, about 100 people are touching you. What do you mean, who touched you? But Jesus knew that there was somebody in that crowd who had faith. See, all these people are touching Jesus. They're all wanting some kind of healing, but none of them were healed. But this woman has enough faith to just reach out and touch his garment. He wants to meet her. He's not angry that someone touched him without his permission. He wants to meet this faithful woman. He turns and she comes to him and confesses all and tells him everything. And not only did she get healed, but he calls her daughter. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Be healed. All those other people wanting to be healed, they didn't have enough faith, but she did. And she was rewarded for her faith. So now we get back to the other miracle that's tied with this. Wrapping up the chapter, verses 35 through 43. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. This little girl, this 12-year-old girl, is one of 3 people that Jesus rose from the dead during his ministry. The lesson for us here is that if your life is in need of repair, if you think your life is over, if you need a new start, Jesus can give you a new life. He is the giver of life. He is the giver of second chances. He can restore your life. Don't give up. Give your life to Jesus and let him make it new. The common theme throughout all of these stories is that each person sought out Jesus in the center of their storms. They may not have known what he would do or how he would handle it, but they were smart enough to come to Jesus when they were in the midst of the storms of life. Or there's the physical storm on the Sea of Galilee, or the storm of being possessed by demons, or having your health, 12-year health problem solved, or the death of a child. They brought their storm to Jesus, and Jesus took care of them in one way or another. Jesus is the calm at the center of our storms of life. If you've been enslaved by the demon of addiction, Jesus can set you free. If you are in need of healing, Jesus is the great physician. If you need a new life, a do-over, a fresh start, Jesus is the giver of life. Jesus is the God of second chances. So whatever storms you have in your life, know that you are not alone. You don't need to face it alone. Jesus is there with you. Now, he may not take you out of the storm. He may not calm the sea, calm the storm, but he will be there with you. He'll carry you through the storm. Whatever his solution is for your storm, he is the best solution for it. So take your storms to Jesus. Jesus is the calm at the center of our storms.